which to keep himself in clothes and all other expenses. This was about the usual thing at Emmanuel in Ernest's day, though many had much less than this. Ernest did as he had done at school. He spent what he could soon after he received his money. He then incurred a few modest liabilities, and then lived penuriously till next term, when he would immediately pay his debts and start new ones to much the same extent as those which he had just got rid of. When he came into his £5,000 and became independent of his father, £15 or £20 served to cover the whole of his unauthorized expenditure. He joined the boat club, and was constant in his attendance at the boats. He still smoked, but never took more wine or beer than was good for him, except perhaps on the occasion of a boating supper, but even then he found the consequences unpleasant, and soon learned how to keep within safe limits. He attended chapel as often as he was compelled to do so. He communicated 2 or 3 times a year, because his tutor told him he ought to. In fact, he set himself to live soberly and cleanly, as I imagine all his instincts prompted him to do, and when he fell, as who that is born of woman can help sometimes doing, it was not till after a sharp tussle with a temptation that was more than his flesh and blood could stand. Then he was very penitent, and would go a fairly long while without sinning again, and this was how it had always been with him since he had arrived at years of indiscretion. Even to the end of his career at Cambridge he was not aware that he had it in him to do anything, but others had begun to see that he was not wanting in ability, and sometimes told him so. He did not believe it. Indeed, he knew very well that if they thought him clever they were being taken in, but it pleased him to have been able to take them in, and he tried to do so still further. He was therefore a good deal on the look-out for cants that he could catch and apply in season, and might have done himself some mischief thus, if he had not been ready to throw over any cant as soon as he had come across another more nearly to his fancy. His friends used to say that when he rose he flew like a snipe, darting several times in various directions before he settled down to a steady straight flight, but when he had once got into this, he would keep to it. Chapter 46. When he was in his 3rd year a magazine was founded at Cambridge, the contributions to which were exclusively by undergraduates. Ernest sent in an essay upon the Greek drama, which he had declined to let me reproduce here without his being allowed to re-edit it. I have therefore been unable to give it in its original form, but when pruned of its redundancies, and this is all that has been done to it, it runs as follows. I shall not attempt, within the limits at my disposal, to make a résumé of the rise and progress of the Greek drama, but will confine myself to considering whether the reputation enjoyed by the 3 chief Greek tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, is one that will be permanent, or whether they will one day be held to have been overrated. Why, I ask myself, do I see much that I could easily admire in Homer, Thucydides, Herodotus, Demosthenes, Aristophanes, Theocritus, parts of Lucretius, Horace's satires and epistles, to say nothing of other ancient writers, and yet find myself at once repelled by even those works of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, which are most generally admired. With the first-named writers I am in the hands of men who feel, if not as I do, still as I can understand their feeling, and as I am interested to see that they should have felt. With the second I have so little sympathy that I cannot understand how anyone can ever have taken any interest in them whatever. Their highest flights to me are dull, pompous, and artificial productions, which, if they were to appear now for the first time, would, I should think, either fall dead or be severely handled by the critics. I wish to know whether it is I who am at fault in this matter, or whether part of the blame may not rest with the tragedians themselves. How far, I wonder, did the Athenians genuinely like these poets, and how far was the applause which was lavished upon them due to fashion or affectation? How far, in fact, did admiration for the orthodox tragedians take that place among the Athenians which going to church does among ourselves? This is a venturesome question, considering the verdict now generally given for over 2000 years, nor should I have permitted myself to ask it if it had not been suggested to me by one whose reputation stands as high, and has been sanctioned for as long time as those of the tragedians themselves. I mean by Aristophanes. Numbers, weight of authority, and time have conspired to place Aristophanes on as high a literary pinnacle as any ancient writer, with the exception perhaps of Homer. But he makes no secret of heartily hating Euripides and Sophocles, and I strongly suspect only praises Aeschylus, that he may run down the other two with greater impunity. For after all there is no such difference between Aeschylus and his successors as will render the former very good and the latter very bad, and the thrusts of Aeschylus which Aristophanes puts into the mouth of Euripides go home too well to have been written by an admirer. It may be observed that while Euripides accuses Aeschylus of being pomp-bundle-worded, which I suppose means bombastic and given to rhodomontade, Aeschylus retorts on Euripides that he is a gossip gleaner, a describer of beggars, and a rag stitcher, from which it may be inferred that he was truer to the life of his own times than Aeschylus was. It happens, however, that a faithful rendering of contemporary life is the very quality which gives it most permanent interest to any work of fiction, whether in literature or painting, and it is a not unnatural consequence that while only 7 plays by Aeschylus, and the same number by Sophocles, have come down to us, we have no fewer than 19 by Euripides. This, however, is a digression. The question before us is whether Aristophanes really liked Aeschylus or only pretended to do so. It must be remembered that the claims of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides to the foremost place among tragedians were held to be as incontrovertible as those of Dante, Petrarch, Tasso, and Ariosto to be the greatest of Italian poets, are held among the Italians of today. If we can fancy some witty, genial writer, we will say in Florence, finding himself bored by all the poets I have named, we can yet believe he would be unwilling to admit that he disliked them without exception. He would prefer to think he could see something at any rate in Dante, whom he could idealize more easily, inasmuch as he was more remote. In order to carry his countrymen the farther with him, he would endeavor to meet them more than was consistent with his own instincts. Without some such palliation as admiration for one, at any rate, of the tragedians, it would be almost as dangerous for Aristophanes to attack them as it would be for an Englishman now to say that he did not think very much of the Elizabethan dramatists. Yet which of us in his heart likes any of the Elizabethan dramatists except Shakespeare? Are they in reality anything else than literary struldbrugs? I conclude upon the whole that Aristophanes did not like any of the tragedians, yet no one will deny that this keen, witty, outspoken writer was as good a judge of literary value, and as able to see any beauties that the tragic dramas contained as 9/10 at any rate of ourselves. He had, moreover, the advantage of thoroughly understanding the standpoint from which the tragedians expected their work to be judged. And what was his conclusion? Briefly, it was little else than this: that they were a fraud, or something very like it. For my own part, I cordially agree with him. I am free to confess that with the exception of perhaps some of the Psalms of David, I know no writings which seem so little to deserve their reputation. I do not know that I should particularly mind my sisters reading them, but I will take good care never to read them myself. This last bit about the Psalms was awful, and there was a great fight with the editor as to whether or no it should be allowed to stand. Ernest himself was frightened at it,